I'm Beth Jones, 26 years old, and I was wiping mashed carrots off my 8-month-old nephew Oliver's chin when my phone lit up with a message that would change everything. The little guy was giggling, orange puree smeared across his chubby cheeks, completely oblivious to the bomb about to drop on our family. The notification made my stomach clench before I even read it. My parents had been acting strange for weeks, whispering behind closed doors, making mysterious phone calls, but nothing could have prepared me for what appeared on my screen. We're starting fresh in Manchester. Sarah made her choice having Oliver. You girls figure it out. Don't try to contact us. This is what's best for everyone. I stared at the words, my hands trembling slightly as Oliver reached for his sippy cup. Manchester, as in Manchester, England. My parents had literally fled the country, abandoning their daughter and grandson without so much as a goodbye. But here's the thing that would have shocked them if they'd bothered to stick around. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't crying. Instead, I looked down at Oliver's innocent face and whispered, "Thank God I changed those locks yesterday, little man." You see, while my parents were busy planning their great escape, I'd been 3 steps ahead, preparing for the betrayal I saw coming from miles away. The bank accounts they thought they'd cleaned out, already secured. The house they assumed they could return to whenever convenient, no longer accessible to them. My sister Sarah was still at her nursing clinical rotation, completely unaware that our parents had just torched our family and fled across the Atlantic. She'd come home expecting dinner and help with Oliver's bedtime routine. Instead, she'd find a half-empty house and the devastating truth about the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. If this story hits you in the gut like it did me, smash that like button and subscribe because what my parents did next will blow your mind. Trust me, you won't see this coming. As I fed Oliver another spoonful of carrots, watching him clap his tiny hands together in pure joy, I couldn't help but smile. My parents thought they were so clever, disappearing in the middle of the day while Sarah and I were at work. They probably imagined us discovering their absence tonight, panicking about bills and childcare, maybe even begging them to come back. But they had no idea what was waiting for them when they tried to come crawling back 3 months later. To understand how we got to this point, I need to take you back 18 months to when everything started falling apart. My sister Sarah Carolina was 23 in her final year of nursing school and completely head over heels for Matthew Joshua, a charming pre-med student who talked a big game about their future together. Sarah had always been the dreamer in our family, the one who believed in fairy tale endings and happily ever after. So when she got pregnant during her clinical rotations, she was terrified, but also secretly thrilled. Matthew had been talking about marriage, about building a life together after graduation. She thought this baby would be the beginning of their perfect little family. Instead, Matthew Joshua disappeared faster than morning fog. One day, he was promising to support her through everything. The next day, his phone was disconnected, and his roommates claimed they had no idea where he'd gone. Sarah later found out through mutual friends that he'd transferred to a medical school in California, apparently deciding that fatherhood didn't fit into his career plans. I'll never forget the night Sarah came home from her ultrasound appointment, clutching the sonogram photos with tears streaming down her face. She'd gone alone because Matthew had suddenly developed a scheduling conflict that we now know was just cowardice. "Beth," she whispered, collapsing onto my bed. "I don't know how I'm going to do this alone." That's when our parents, Frank Klein and Darlene Houston, surprised us all by stepping up. At least, that's what we thought at the time. "Honey, you're not alone," Mom had said, wrapping Sarah in a hug. "We're family. We'll figure this out together." Dad nodded enthusiastically. "Your mother's right. This house is big enough for all of us. We can share expenses, help with childcare. It'll be like having a built-in support system." It sounded perfect. Too perfect, as it turned out. The arrangement we worked out seemed fair on paper. Sarah would continue her nursing program while living at home. I'd stay in my childhood bedroom instead of getting my own apartment, contributing to household expenses while helping with the baby. Mom and Dad would provide childcare support and cover the mortgage since the house was in their names. What nobody mentioned was how the financial reality would actually shake out. My marketing job at a growing tech startup was paying me $68,000 a year, which was decent money for someone my age. Sarah's nursing program came with a small stipend, maybe $800 a month, barely enough for her textbooks and clinical supplies. Meanwhile, Dad had taken early retirement from his accounting firm, and Mom worked part-time at a boutique downtown. Their combined income was maybe $40,000 annually, plus Dad's reduced pension benefits. I pulled out my laptop and showed Sarah the spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for months. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the numbers that told the real story of our household. Monthly mortgage, $2,400, utilities, $350, groceries for 5 people, $600, baby supplies, formula, diapers, $400, insurance, car payments, miscellaneous expenses, another $800. Total monthly household costs, $4,550. My contribution, $2,700. Sarah's contribution, $400. Mom and Dad's contribution, $1,450. "I'm paying 60% of our household expenses," I told Sarah, "while living in my childhood bedroom and changing diapers every night so you can study." Don't get me wrong, I loved Oliver from the moment he was born. That tiny, wrinkled little face, those impossibly small fingers that would grip mine with surprising strength. Being his aunt felt like the most important job I'd ever had, but I started noticing things. The way Dad would suddenly remember urgent errands whenever Oliver started crying, how Mom would develop mysterious headaches during his fussy evening hours, the increasingly frequent comments about how different their retirement looked compared to their friends who were traveling and enjoying their golden years. "We raised our kids already," I overheard Dad telling Mom one evening when they thought I was upstairs. "This wasn't the retirement we planned." "I know, Frank," Mom replied, her voice tired. "I love Oliver, but I'm exhausted. Sarah's always studying, Beth's always working, and we're stuck with all the actual parenting." That conversation hit me like a slap. Stuck with the parenting? Oliver was their grandson, not some burden they'd been saddled with against their will. The resentment grew slowly, like a cancer spreading through our family dynamic. Dad started making passive-aggressive comments about young people not taking responsibility. Mom began sighing dramatically whenever Oliver needed attention during her favorite TV shows. Sarah was oblivious to most of it, buried in her textbooks and clinical rotations. Nursing school is brutal under the best circumstances, but doing it as a single mother while grieving the relationship she'd thought would last forever? She was barely keeping her head above water. I became Oliver's primary caregiver by default. Morning feedings before work, evening baths, midnight diaper changes, weekend trips to the pediatrician. Sarah helped when she could, but between classes, clinical rotations, and studying for her licensing exam, her time was completely consumed. My social life disappeared. Dating became impossible. My friends stopped inviting me out because I always had to decline or leave early for baby-related emergencies. My career advancement stalled because I couldn't work late or travel for conferences. But looking at Oliver's sweet face, watching him learn to smile and laugh and clap his hands, I couldn't bring myself to resent the sacrifices. He didn't ask to be born into this complicated situation. He deserved stability, love, and security, regardless of what the adults in his life were going through. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy being the responsible one, holding our family together through sheer force of will and financial contribution, my parents were making plans that would shatter everything I'd worked so hard to build. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in late February. I was giving Oliver his bath while Sarah studied for her pharmacology exam, and I heard Dad on the phone in the kitchen using a voice I'd never heard before, hushed and almost secretive. "Yes, we're very interested in the Manchester property market," he was saying. What's the average rental cost for a 2-bedroom flat in the city center? Manchester. I paused, Oliver's rubber duck frozen in my hand. Why would Dad be asking about rentals in Manchester? We lived in Ohio. The only Manchester I could think of that would matter for property investment was Manchester, England. I strained to hear more, but he'd moved outside to the back porch, taking his conversation into the cold February air rather than risk being overheard. That alone sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Dad hated the cold. He wouldn't voluntarily stand outside in 30-degree weather unless he was desperate for privacy. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to my parents' behavior. Mom had always been a creature of habit, watching her evening soap operas religiously, but suddenly she was spending hours on her laptop instead, clicking away from whatever she was viewing whenever I entered the room. Just browsing Facebook, she'd say with a forced smile, but I caught glimpses of her screen that looked nothing like social media: travel websites, immigration forums, currency conversion calculators. Dad developed a sudden interest in international banking. I found pamphlets from our credit union about wire transfers and foreign exchange rates scattered on his desk. When I asked about them, he mumbled something about diversifying investments and quickly shuffled the papers into a drawer. But the most disturbing change was how they interacted with Oliver. The grandparents who had once cooed over every milestone, who took hundreds of photos of his first smile and first solid food, suddenly seemed detached. They'd hold him when absolutely necessary, but gone was the joy, the natural affection I'd always associated with grandparent love. "Oliver cries all night," I heard Mom complaining to Dad one evening when they thought I was asleep. "I can't do this anymore, Frank. I'm 62 years old. I should be planning garden parties and book clubs, not dealing with dirty diapers and teething tantrums." "I know, Darlene," Dad replied. "We've given enough of our lives to raising children. Sarah made her choice. Beth's young and capable. They'll figure it out." The casual way they discussed abandoning their responsibilities made my blood run cold. But it was the phrase, "they'll figure it out," that really terrified me. It sounded less like confidence in our abilities and more like preparation for their absence. I needed help processing what I was observing, so I called my best friend Laura Chang. We'd been close since college, and she had a sharp analytical mind that I trusted completely. "Laura, I need to run something by you," I said, settling into my car during my lunch break where I could speak freely. "My parents are acting really strange, and I'm starting to worry they're planning something drastic." I laid out everything I'd noticed: the secretive phone calls, the travel research, the emotional distance from Oliver, the financial pamphlets. Laura listened without interrupting, which I appreciated because it helped me organize my thoughts. "Beth," she said finally, "they're not just planning a vacation, they're planning an escape." Hearing someone else voice my fears made them feel more real and more terrifying. "But they can't just leave," I protested. "Sarah's still in school, Oliver needs stability, we have a household to maintain." "Can't they?" Laura asked gently. "What's actually stopping them? The house is in their names. They're not legally obligated to support Sarah or Oliver. If they wanted to disappear tomorrow, what would prevent them?" That question haunted me for days. What would prevent them? The answer was nothing, absolutely nothing except moral obligation and family loyalty. Two things that seemed to be rapidly eroding in our household. I decided I needed concrete evidence of what they were planning. The next Saturday, while Mom and Dad went to their weekly grocery shopping trip and Sarah was at clinical rotation, I did something I'd never done before. I snooped through their personal belongings. I started with Dad's home office, a small room where he kept his computer and important documents. His browser history was a goldmine of concerning information: Manchester rental properties, UK visa requirements for retirees, cost of living comparisons between Ohio and England, international shipping companies for household goods. But the most damning evidence was a bookmarked webpage for a property management company in Manchester, with a specific listing circled in red digital ink. Charming two-bedroom flat in Northern Quarter, perfect for mature couples seeking city adventure, long-term lease preferred. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking as I documented their secret research. This wasn't casual browsing or retirement daydreaming. This was active planning for relocation. In Mom's dresser drawer, hidden beneath her winter sweaters, I found printed emails from a UK immigration attorney discussing visitor visa extensions and pathways to permanent residency for American retirees. The consultation fee alone was $800, money they'd apparently spent without mentioning it to anyone. The final piece of evidence came from their shared email account, which I accessed using the password they'd never bothered to change: Oliver's birthday. There, in a folder labeled New Chapter, were confirmation emails for passport renewals, international phone plan upgrades, and most shocking of all, correspondence with a Manchester estate agent about viewing properties during a scouting trip planned for early March. I sat in their bedroom, staring at the computer screen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. They weren't just thinking about leaving. They had a timeline, a destination, and professional help making it happen. But what made my stomach turn was an email thread between Mom and her sister in California, dated just 3 days earlier. "We've decided to make the move to Manchester," Mom had written. "Frank and I have given 35 years to raising children and supporting family. It's time for us to live for ourselves. The girls are adults now, and Sarah's situation isn't our responsibility to fix long term. We'll help them transition, of course, but we can't sacrifice our golden years for someone else's choices." Help them transition? What did that even mean? A week's notice? A month? And what about Oliver, who had never known life without his grandparents, who called them Mama D and Papa Frank, who lit up every time they entered the room? I called Laura immediately, my voice shaking as I described what I'd found. "Beth, you need legal advice," she said firmly. "Like yesterday. If they're planning to abandon Sarah and Oliver, you need to understand your options for protecting them." That afternoon, I made an appointment with Gary Madison, a family law attorney Laura's cousin had recommended. His office could see me the following Monday, which felt like an eternity away, but was the best I could do. Meanwhile, I started taking my own protective measures. I opened a separate savings account in just my name and began transferring money from our shared household account, carefully documenting every deposit I'd made over the past year. If my parents were planning to clean out our joint finances before disappearing, I needed to protect Sarah's and my contributions. I also researched locksmith services and found one that could change our door locks within 24 hours' notice. It felt extreme, but if my parents were capable of abandoning their daughter and grandson, they were capable of returning whenever convenient to reclaim their house, regardless of who they'd hurt in the process. The hardest part was keeping this information from Sarah. She was already stressed to her breaking point with nursing school, and her licensing exam was just 6 weeks away. Adding family drama to her plate felt cruel, but I also knew she deserved to be prepared for what was coming. I decided to wait until after my meeting with Gary Madison to tell her anything. I needed to understand our legal standing and options before I could offer her any reassurance or concrete plans. That Sunday evening, I was feeding Oliver his dinner when I overheard another conversation that confirmed my worst fears. "The flights are booked," Dad said quietly to Mom as they cleaned up the kitchen. "March 15th, departing at 6 a.m. That gives us time to get settled before the lease starts on April 1st. March 15th. That was exactly 2 weeks away. "What about telling the girls?" Mom asked, her voice uncertain. "We'll leave them a note," Dad replied, "explaining everything. By the time they find it, we'll already be in Manchester. Clean break, no messy goodbyes or arguments." A note. They were planning to abandon their family via a note, like teenagers running away from home. That's when I knew I had to act fast. I spent that night researching everything I could about tenant rights, grandparent abandonment, and emergency custody procedures. I made lists of every bill that would need to be transferred to my name, every responsibility that would fall on my shoulders once they disappeared. But it wasn't until Monday morning, when I was getting ready for my appointment with Gary Madison, that I found the final piece of evidence that made everything crystal clear. I was borrowing Dad's laptop charger when I noticed a new email notification. Without thinking, I clicked on it, and my heart stopped. It was a flight confirmation email. 2 one-way tickets to Manchester, England, departing March 15th at 6:05 a.m. The return date field was blank. One-way tickets. They weren't planning a scouting trip or an extended vacation. They were planning to disappear permanently, leaving Sarah and Oliver and me to pick up the pieces of the life they'd helped create. That's when I found the one-way flight confirmations hidden in Dad's email and realized I had less than 48 hours to save my family. The morning of March 15th started like any other Wednesday. I was getting Oliver ready for daycare while Sarah grabbed a quick breakfast before her clinical rotation at the hospital. Mom and Dad were unusually quiet, but I attributed that to the early hour. They'd always been grumpy before their first cup of coffee. "I'll pick up Oliver around 5, I told Sarah as she gathered her nursing supplies. "Your pharmacology study group is at 7, right?" "Yeah, thanks, Beth," she said, kissing Oliver's forehead. "You're the best." If only she knew what I'd discovered, what I was preparing for. But I'd decided to wait until after Gary Madison confirmed our legal options before telling her anything. No point in destroying her focus during clinical rotations if there was a chance I was overreacting. I dropped Oliver at daycare and headed to work, my phone buzzing constantly with nervous energy. Every notification made me jump, wondering if this would be the moment my parents made their move. At 11:47 a.m. it happened. I was in a client meeting presenting a social media campaign for a local restaurant chain when my phone lit up with a text message from Dad. The timestamp would be burned into my memory forever because it marked the exact moment our family imploded. "Beth, by the time you read this, your mother and I will be on our way to Manchester. We've decided to start fresh in England. We deserve happiness too. You're adults now. Oliver isn't our responsibility. We've left some money for immediate expenses. But you girls need to figure out your own living situation. Don't try to contact us until we're ready. This is what's best for everyone." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. They'd actually done it. After weeks of suspicious behavior and secret planning, my parents had abandoned their daughter and grandson via text message. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The client was still talking about target demographics and engagement metrics, but their voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. All I could think about was Sarah coming home from her clinical rotation to find an empty house and a devastating note. "I'm sorry," I interrupted, standing abruptly. "I have a family emergency. I need to leave immediately." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing between fury and disbelief. How could they do this? How could 2 people who'd raised me, who'd held Oliver as a newborn and promised to help Sarah through nursing school, just disappear without even a face-to-face goodbye? The house felt different the moment I walked in. Too quiet, too empty. Their bedroom door was open, revealing bare dressers and an unmade bed. The closet was half empty, with only old clothes and items they deemed unworthy of their new life remaining. On the kitchen counter, I found the note they'd mentioned. It was worse than the text message, somehow more final and cruel in its handwritten formality. "Sarah and Beth, we know this will be difficult to understand, but we've made the decision to relocate to Manchester, England. We've spent our entire adult lives supporting family, and now it's time for us to live for ourselves. Sarah, your situation with Oliver was your choice, and while we love our grandson, we cannot sacrifice our retirement years to raise another child. Beth, you're capable and financially stable. You'll both figure this out. We've left $1,500 in the household account for immediate needs. The house payments are current through March. After that, you'll need to make your own arrangements. We'll contact you when we're settled. Love, Mom and Dad." $1,500. They thought $1,500 would cover the transition from a multi-generational household to Sarah and me suddenly being responsible for everything. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been 3 steps ahead of them for the past week. After my meeting with Gary Madison, I'd immediately transferred $8,700 from our joint household account to a new account in Sarah's name and mine. That money represented every penny Sarah and I had contributed over the past year, plus a buffer for Oliver's immediate needs. I'd also changed the locks on Monday afternoon, telling the locksmith it was a security upgrade after a break-in in the neighborhood. The new keys were safely in my possession, and my parents' old keys were now useless pieces of metal. Most importantly, I'd already contacted the mortgage company and our utility providers, explaining that I'd be taking over the accounts due to a family situation. Gary Madison had helped me draft the necessary paperwork to assume responsibility for the house payments, contingent on my parents' formal abandonment. When Sarah came home at 6:30, exhausted from a 12-hour clinical rotation, she immediately sensed something was wrong. "Where are Mom and Dad?" she asked, noticing the unusual silence. "And why does the house feel so empty?" I handed her the note without saying anything, watching her face crumble as she read their casual dismissal of her and Oliver. She sank into a kitchen chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're really gone?" she whispered. "They just left us?" "They're gone," I confirmed. "But Sarah, listen to me. We're going to be okay. I've been preparing for this." I showed her the bank statements proving I'd secured our money, the new account with both our names, the changed locks, and the legal consultation notes from Gary Madison. "They can't get back in," I told her firmly. "I changed the locks yesterday. The house is ours now, and so is the financial security we built together." Sarah stared at the documents, her tears gradually stopping as she processed what I'd done. "You knew this was coming?" she asked. "I suspected it for weeks. I've been gathering evidence and taking protective measures. They thought they could abandon us and leave us financially devastated, but they underestimated how much I was willing to fight for our family. Drop a comment if you've ever had family abandon you when you needed them most. What would you have done in Beth's situation?" That night, as we put Oliver to bed in the house that was now truly ours, Sarah and I made plans for our new reality. We'd split the mortgage and utilities. I'd handle the major expenses while she finished nursing school. We'd create the stable, loving home that Oliver deserved, without the toxic resentment that had been poisoning our family dynamic. For 3 months, we heard nothing from Manchester. No calls, no emails, no social media updates. It was as if Frank Klein and Darlene Houston had vanished from the face of the earth. But 3 months later, when their UK visas were denied and their money ran out, they showed up at our door, expecting to waltz back in. The first sign that my parents' Manchester adventure was falling apart came on a rainy Thursday in June. I was working from home while Oliver napped when my phone rang with an international number I didn't recognize. "Beth?" Mom's voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "Honey, we need to talk." I hadn't heard from them in exactly 3 months and 2 days, not since that devastating text message from the airport. Sarah and I had built a new routine, a new life, and honestly, we'd been thriving without their constant negativity and resentment. "Hello, Darlene," I said, deliberately using her first name instead of Mom. "How's Manchester treating you?" There was a long pause. "It's been challenging. More complicated than we expected. Listen, we're thinking about coming home for a visit, just to see how everyone's doing." "A visit?" "Right." "When were you thinking?" "Well, actually, we're at the airport now. Our flight lands at 7 tonight." My blood pressure spiked. They were already on their way back, assuming they could just waltz into our lives whenever it was convenient for them. No discussion, no warning, just the same selfish entitlement that had driven them to abandon us in the first place. "I see," I said carefully. "And where exactly are you planning to stay during this visit?" "At home, of course. It's still our house, Beth." "Actually, it's not. But we'll discuss that when you arrive. I'll pick you up at the airport." I hung up and immediately called Gary Madison. Over the past 3 months, he'd become more than just our attorney. He'd become a trusted advisor who understood the complexities of our situation. "They're coming back," I told him. "Tonight. They think they can just resume their old life like nothing happened." "Are you prepared for this?" Gary asked. "We've discussed the possibility, but now that it's happening, how do you feel?" "Angry," I admitted, "but also ready. We've built something good here, Gary. Sarah's thriving in school, Oliver's happy and healthy, and I've never felt more confident in my decisions. They don't get to destroy that because their fantasy life didn't work out." "Remember, you hold all the cards now," Gary reminded me. "The house is in your name through the abandonment clause we filed. The financial accounts are secured. They have no legal standing to demand anything from you or Sarah." That evening, I drove to the airport alone. Sarah was at her study group, and I'd arranged for Laura to watch Oliver. I wanted this first confrontation to be on my terms, without any emotional manipulation involving their grandson. I spotted them at baggage claim immediately. They looked older, somehow smaller than when they'd left. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and Mom had lost weight in a way that made her look frail rather than healthy. Their clothes were wrinkled from the long flight, and they both carried themselves with the defeated posture of people whose dreams had crashed into reality. "Beth!" Mom rushed toward me with outstretched arms, but I stepped back, maintaining physical distance. "Darlene." "Frank." I nodded politely. "How was your flight?" Dad's face darkened at my formal tone. "What's with the attitude, Beth? We're your parents." "You're the people who abandoned Sarah and Oliver 3 months ago," I corrected. "Let's get your bags and go. We have a lot to discuss." The drive home was tense and silent. I could feel them exchanging glances in the back seat, probably wondering why I wasn't falling all over myself with relief at their return. They'd likely expected tears, apologies, maybe even gratitude that they'd come back to rescue us from the mess they'd assumed we'd made of our lives. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad immediately noticed something was different. "Why are there new flowers in the front garden?" he asked suspiciously. "Sarah and I planted them," I replied. "We've made several improvements to the house." I led them to the front door and pulled out my keys. Dad reached for his own key ring, but when he tried to insert his key into the lock, it wouldn't turn. "What the hell?" He jiggled the key frantically. "Beth, something's wrong with the lock." "No, something's wrong with your key," I said calmly, opening the door with my new key. "I changed the locks in March, right after you abandoned us." The color drained from both their faces as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "You changed the locks?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "But this is our house." "Was your house," I corrected, stepping inside and gesturing for them to follow. "Before you abandoned it and your family to chase your Manchester fantasy." The house looked completely different from when they'd left. Sarah and I had rearranged furniture, painted the living room a warm yellow, and filled the space with photos of Oliver's milestones they'd missed. Their absence was everywhere and nowhere, like they'd been carefully edited out of our family story. "Where are our things?" Dad demanded, looking around frantically. "Our furniture, our belongings." "In storage," I replied. "I packed everything up after you left and put it in a climate-controlled unit downtown. I have the address if you'd like to retrieve your possessions." "Storage?" Mom sank onto the couch, which was now covered with a cheerful floral throw Sarah had chosen. "You put our entire life in storage? You put your entire life on a plane to Manchester," I shot back. "I just cleaned up the mess you left behind." Dad's face was turning red with anger. "This is our house, Beth. You can't just take over our property because we went on an extended vacation." "Extended vacation?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you're calling it now? Because your text message said you were starting fresh in England. Your note said Sarah and I needed to figure out our own living situation. That doesn't sound like vacation planning to me." I pulled out my phone and showed them screenshots of their abandonment messages. "Would you like me to read your exact words? Oliver isn't our responsibility. You girls need to figure out your own living situation." Mom started crying, but they were manipulative tears, the kind she'd used throughout my childhood to avoid accountability. We were overwhelmed, honey. We made a mistake, but we're back now, and we want to make things right. Make things right? Sarah's voice came from the doorway. She'd come home early from her study group, probably sensing she was needed. You think you can just show up and make 3 months of abandonment disappear? Sarah, sweetheart. Dad stood up, trying to approach her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Just don't. Her voice was steady, stronger than I'd ever heard it. Do you have any idea what you put us through? I had to take my licensing exam while wondering if we'd have a place to live. Beth had to become Oliver's primary parent overnight while managing a full-time job and all the household responsibilities you dumped on us. We left money, Mom protested weakly. $1,500, I said, for a mortgage payment of $2,400 plus utilities, groceries, and baby expenses. Your math was as bad as your parenting. Dad's manipulation tactics shifted to anger and threats. Fine. You want to play hardball? This house is legally in our names. We can have you evicted for trespassing and theft. We can call the police right now. I smiled, and it must have been unsettling because he actually took a step back. Actually, you can't, I said, pulling out a folder of legal documents Gary had prepared. See, when you abandoned the property and your financial obligations, you triggered several legal clauses that transferred responsibility to the occupants maintaining the residence. Gary Madison, our family attorney, filed all the necessary paperwork with the county. The house is now legally under my stewardship due to abandonment. You got a lawyer? Mom's voice was horrified, as if seeking legal protection was somehow more offensive than their abandonment. I got a lawyer the day I found your flight confirmations, I confirmed. I also secured our financial contributions, changed the locks, and established legal guardianship protocols for Oliver in case you tried to use him as leverage. Dad pulled out his phone. We'll see about that. I'm calling the police right now. Go ahead, I said calmly. But you should know that Gary also filed a restraining order yesterday, anticipating your return. Any attempt to force entry into this residence or harass the current legal occupants will result in your immediate arrest. The phone slipped from Dad's hand. A restraining order against your own parents? Against the people who abandoned their daughter and grandson, Sarah said firmly. You don't get to claim parental rights after proving you're not actually parents when it matters. Mom's tears turned more desperate. We're your parents. How can you be so cruel to us? We made a mistake, but we're family. Family doesn't abandon each other, I replied. Family doesn't leave notes instead of having conversations. Family doesn't disappear for 3 months and then show up expecting everything to be exactly as they left it. We had problems in Manchester, Dad admitted, his bluster finally deflating. The visa situation was more complicated than we expected. The cost of living was higher. We couldn't find suitable housing. So your backup plan was to come crawling back here and pretend nothing happened? Sarah asked. What about next time you get wanderlust? What about the next time Oliver becomes inconvenient for your retirement dreams? There won't be a next time, Mom pleaded. We've learned our lesson. You're right, I agreed. There won't be a next time, because you're not moving back in. You're not resuming your old roles. You're not getting access to Oliver without supervision. You made your choice in March, and now you get to live with the consequences. Dad tried one more manipulation tactic. Beth, you're being unreasonable. We're willing to apologize to make amends, but you can't just steal our house and our grandson. I didn't steal anything, I said firmly. I protected what you abandoned. There's a difference. I handed them a business card. This is the address of your storage unit. Your belongings are safe and climate controlled. I've also made reservations for you at the Hampton Inn on Route 37. 3 nights, paid in advance. That should give you time to figure out your next steps. You're kicking us out? Mom's voice was incredulous. I'm establishing boundaries, I corrected. Something that should have happened years ago. As I watched them gather their suitcases and head toward the door they could no longer open with their own keys, I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. The people who had raised me were strangers now, revealed by crisis to be selfish and unreliable in ways I'd never fully understood. But Sarah and Oliver and I? We were stronger than ever, bonded by the adversity they'd put us through, and empowered by our ability to not just survive their abandonment, but thrive in spite of it. The real confrontation, I knew, was still coming. This was just the opening round. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday at Gary Madison's law office. I'd chosen the timing deliberately, knowing that the formal environment and professional setting would prevent my parents from using their usual emotional manipulation tactics. Sarah and I arrived 15 minutes early, both dressed professionally and carrying organized folders of documentation. Sarah had taken the morning off from her clinical rotation, something she rarely did, but she understood how important this meeting was for establishing our family's future. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her, as we sat in Gary's waiting room. "I've been ready since March," she replied, her voice steady. "They need to understand that their actions have consequences." Gary emerged from his office at exactly 10 o'clock, looking every inch the competent family attorney in his navy suit and confident demeanor. "Beth, Sarah, good morning. Are your parents here yet?" As if summoned by his question, Frank and Darlene walked through the front door, looking uncomfortable and out of place. They'd clearly tried to dress for the occasion, but their clothes looked hastily purchased and ill-fitting, probably from their 3-day shopping spree since returning from Manchester. "Mr. and Mrs. Klein," Gary greeted them formally, "please come into the conference room." The conference room was designed to be intimidating, with its long mahogany table, leather chairs, and walls lined with legal books. Gary took his seat at the head of the table, with Sarah and me on one side and my parents on the other. The physical arrangement made the adversarial nature of the meeting crystal clear. "Before we begin," Gary said, opening a thick file folder, "I want to establish the purpose of this meeting. My clients, Beth and Sarah, have requested mediation to establish new boundaries and legal protections following your abandonment of family responsibilities in March." "Abandonment is a strong word," Dad protested immediately. "We took a trip that lasted longer than expected." Gary slid a document across the table. "This is your text message to Beth on March 15th, sent from Manchester Airport. Would you like me to read it aloud, or would you prefer to read it yourself?" Dad's face flushed as he scanned the message. "We were overwhelmed. We made a mistake." "A mistake that lasted 3 months and 4 days," Sarah interjected, "during which time you had no contact with your 8-month-old grandson, missed his first birthday, and left us to handle all household and childcare responsibilities alone." Mom tried her tearful approach. "We love Oliver. We love both of you girls. We just needed some time to ourselves." "Time to yourselves," I repeated. "Is that what you call researching permanent relocation, signing lease agreements, and telling your sister in California that Sarah's situation wasn't your responsibility to fix long-term?" I slid another document across the table, this one a printed email from Mom's correspondence with her sister. "Would you like to explain this email where you explicitly stated that you were moving to Manchester permanently and that Oliver wasn't your responsibility?" Mom's tears stopped abruptly as she realized how thoroughly I documented their deception. Gary leaned forward. "Your clients abandoned their responsibilities and now want to dictate terms for their return. That's not how this works." "We're still Oliver's grandparents," Frank said desperately. "We have rights." "Actually, you don't," Gary replied, pulling out another set of documents. "Grandparent rights in this state are contingent on maintaining a consistent relationship with the child and acting in the child's best interests. Your 3-month abandonment, documented through these communications and your own admissions, demonstrates a pattern of behavior that courts would consider detrimental to the child's welfare. He slid Oliver's medical records across the table. These are Oliver's pediatric records from the past 3 months. During your absence, he missed 2 scheduled vaccinations and a developmental assessment because there was no one available to provide medical history or consent for treatment. Beth had to obtain emergency guardianship documentation just to ensure he received proper health care. "We didn't know," Mom whispered. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Sarah said firmly. "You didn't call, you didn't email, you didn't check on his welfare even once. For 3 months, as far as Oliver was concerned, his grandparents had vanished from the earth." Gary opened another folder. "I also have documentation of your failed visa applications and rental rejections in Manchester. It appears your return to the United States wasn't motivated by concern for your family, but by the collapse of your relocation plans." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Our visa situation was temporary. We were working with immigration attorneys." "Were you?" I asked, sliding the final piece of evidence across the table. "Because this is a rejection letter from UK Immigration Services, dated May 22nd, stating that your application for extended residency was denied due to insufficient financial resources and lack of employment sponsorship." The room fell silent as my parents stared at the documentation of their failed escape plan. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You will have supervised visitation with Oliver 2 hours every other Saturday at a location of our choosing. You will have no input into his medical care, education, or daily routine. You will not attempt to undermine Sarah's parenting decisions or my role as his primary caregiver." "That's ridiculous," Dad sputtered. "We're his grandparents." "Grandparents don't abandon babies," I replied. "You lost that title in Manchester." Gary pulled out a formal agreement. "These terms are legally binding. Any violation will result in immediate termination of visitation rights and potential restraining orders." "What about the house?" Mom asked weakly. "The house belongs to Sarah and me now," I said. "Through legal abandonment proceedings, you'll need to find your own housing arrangements." "You can't just steal our house," Dad's voice rose. "I didn't steal it," I corrected. "I assumed responsibility for it when you abandoned it. There's a difference." Gary leaned back in his chair. "Your options are simple. Accept these terms and maintain limited contact with your grandson, or reject them and have no contact at all. The choice is yours." Mom looked desperately between Sarah and me. "This isn't how families are supposed to work." "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "Families are supposed to support each other through difficult times. They're supposed to keep their commitments. They're supposed to put children's needs before their own convenience. You taught us what family isn't supposed to look like." "We can't agree to this," Dad said, standing up abruptly. "These terms are unreasonable." "Then we're done here," I replied, not moving from my seat. "Gary, please file the no-contact order we discussed." "Wait." Mom grabbed Dad's arm. "Frank, sit down, please." The desperation in her voice was palpable. They were finally understanding that they had no leverage, no power to demand anything from us. "We'll agree to the supervised visits," Mom said quietly. "But please don't cut us out completely. Oliver is our grandson." "Oliver is a child who deserves stability and consistency," I replied. "Something you've proven incapable of providing. These terms protect him from future abandonment." Gary slid the agreement toward them. "Sign here if you accept the terms." As I watched my parents reluctantly sign away their parental authority, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and satisfaction. This wasn't the family reconciliation anyone might have hoped for, but it was justice. It was protection for Oliver and accountability for their choices. The people who had raised me were strangers now, revealed by crisis to be fundamentally unreliable. But Sarah and Oliver and I had become something stronger, a chosen family bonded by love rather than obligation, by commitment rather than convenience. 6 months after that confrontation in Gary Madison's office, I'm sitting in our backyard watching Oliver take his first wobbly steps across the grass towards Sarah, who's cheering him on with tears of joy streaming down her face. She's wearing her brand new nursing scrubs, having just completed her first week as a registered nurse at Children's Hospital. "Beth, did you see that?" Sarah calls out, scooping Oliver into her arms as he giggles with delight. 4 steps. He took 4 whole steps. I can't help but smile as I watch them together. This moment, this pure happiness, would never have been possible if we'd remained trapped in the toxic dynamic my parents had created. Their abandonment, as devastating as it felt at the time, had actually freed us to become the family we were meant to be. Sarah graduated nursing school with honors, finishing in the top 10% of her class. The stability we'd built together, the absence of constant criticism and resentment, had allowed her to focus completely on her studies. She'd landed her dream job in pediatric nursing, inspired partly by her experience advocating for Oliver's medical needs during those chaotic months. My own career had flourished as well. Without the emotional drain of managing my parents' expectations and complaints, I'd thrown myself into my marketing work with renewed energy. Last month, I'd been promoted to senior account manager with a salary increase of $15,000 annually. We were not just surviving financially, we were thriving. The supervised visits with Frank and Darlene happened every other Saturday at a local park, exactly as the legal agreement specified. They arrived promptly at 10 a.m. and left at noon, following every rule we'd established. No attempts to undermine our decisions, no guilt trips about their living situation, no demands for extended time. Watching them interact with Oliver during these visits was both sad and revealing. They seemed like strangers trying to connect with a child they barely knew, which, in many ways, they were. Oliver was polite, but distant, treating them more like acquaintances than grandparents. The deep bond that should have existed had been severed by their abandonment, and 2 hours every other week wasn't enough to rebuild what they'd destroyed. "I never thought I'd say this," Sarah told me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner, "but their leaving was the best thing that happened to us." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. Our chosen family had expanded beautifully. Laura Chang had become Oliver's honorary aunt, babysitting regularly and spoiling him with books and educational toys. My co-worker Jennifer and her husband had become close friends, often joining us for weekend barbecues and holiday celebrations. Sarah had connected with other single mothers in her nursing program, creating a support network of women who understood the challenges of balancing career and motherhood. Most importantly, Oliver was thriving. His pediatric records showed accelerated development in language and social skills. Dr. Peterson, his pediatrician, had noted in his file that the child seemed more secure and confident than during the chaotic period of his grandparents' abandonment and return. "He's clearly benefiting from the stability you've created," Dr. Peterson had told us during Oliver's 15-month checkup. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." If this story inspired you to set boundaries with toxic family members, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to choose your peace over keeping family happy? Your story might help someone else find their strength. The house that had once felt like a battleground now felt like a true home. We'd painted every room, planted a vegetable garden, and filled the space with laughter and love instead of resentment and obligation. Oliver's artwork covered the refrigerator, Sarah's nursing degree hung proudly in the living room, and family photos showed the 3 of us building memories that no one could take away. Sometimes I wondered if Frank and Darlene regretted their choices, if they understood what they'd lost when they chose their Manchester fantasy over their family responsibilities. But mostly, I felt grateful. Their abandonment had forced Sarah and me to discover our own strength, to build something better than what we'd inherited. Oliver will grow up knowing that love isn't about blood relations. It's about who shows up when life gets hard. And sometimes, the greatest gift toxic people can give you is their absence. As I watch my nephew chase butterflies in our backyard while his mother plans his upcoming second birthday party, I know we made the right choices. We protected what mattered most. We set boundaries that preserved our peace, and we created a family built on love and commitment rather than obligation and resentment. The people who abandoned us taught us the most valuable lesson of all. We were stronger than we ever imagined, and we deserved better than they were capable of giving.